Hey, why don't we get started? Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michelle Rapp, and I work in the Office of Alumni Relations, and I organize lots of different career programs and services for alumni. And I'm excited to have Jörg Hermans here with us today, and that you're interested in this very important topic of transitions. So I want to start off by telling you a little bit about Jörg. For one, he is the proud parent of a 2022 Northeastern alum, which is his son. And he actually is involved with Northeastern in the Career Design Office, where he shares his expertise as a volunteer, including today's program. Jörg combines leadership, industry, and organizational savvy, as well as an established coaching process to empower individuals and teams in the healthcare industry to develop the clarity needed for better decisions and results in their career, leadership, and business. His consulting work supports biopharma companies in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific in the areas of footprint expansion, brand strategy development, as well as operational models for global and local commercial organizations. He has over 9 years of experience with Biogen and 15 years with Pfizer, and has served in leadership and global roles. I'm excited to have him here today talking with us about transitions.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction. That's quite a mouthful in terms of the experience here. But what this comes down to, doing the 25 years or so that I spent in pharma and biotech, those 25 years were also years of many transitions. They were either geographical in nature, where I had to root up the family and move to Australia within, I think there was an 8-week period to make that decision of being on the plane, to job transitions. And while most of them were pleasant, there were also the unpleasant ones, right? But the bottom line is, I learned from all of them, and that is what I will share with you today. So my experience and my advice, the advice that you will hopefully get today, is not from a book. It's what I've lived through, what I've learned, and what I'm sharing with you today. Okay, so thank you, Michelle, for giving me the opportunity to share what I think might be helpful to some of the alumni, and also for you guys on the phone. Thank you for making the time, and hopefully this is not just a one-off. You will see in the end both Michelle and I are available, because this is just a start, right? Because transition is a process with many interactions, and I'd be happy to share my advice after this presentation. Okay? All right, let's get started. Now, transition, it's a big word, right? Many different meanings. So this is the interactive part. This is where we start talking to each other. So what does transition mean to you? You can speak up, open the mic. You can also put it in the chat room, share with everyone, but share your sense of what does transition mean to you? All right, here we go. New, yeah, change, different, a flower opening. Yeah, some of experience are definitely that. The other ones were, the flower drying up. But again, you learn from all of them. Letting go what you know, for that is a very important one. We'll talk about that. Thank you for sharing that, Kevin. That is probably one of the most difficult things and the least intuitive things, letting go and unlearning. Moving on, yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, future unknown. There is a phase we'll talk about today where you're going to be out at sea, and you left port, you don't see that, and you don't see the island. So you're struggling a little bit, completely normal. Good stuff. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Let's move on. And in addition to let me just make sure I don't shut this down, rather just move this. Here we go. Good. In transition to your definitions, there's roughly 2 billion more definitions that my friend Google came up with in less than a second. You will see them here. You see that whatever that number is, 2 billion, 110 million, and so forth, in 0.57 seconds. So, because the transitions are all different, right? They're all different in terms of their length, their complexity. Does it involve people? Yes or no? Nevertheless, much to my surprise, what you see at the bottom of the slide, following that red arrow, Google with the first, I guess their preferred definition was it's the process or the period of changing from one state or condition to another. I thought that was actually as simple as it can be, and as as broad it as can be, because that is truly what any transition is all about. Right now, fairly broad, right? We want to bring this down to something that is hopefully practical to you. And most of us have experienced or seen or be part of transitions in one of two ways. One is at work, where it doesn't involve people, it involves a project, a product, or a technology transfer, whatever that might be. It's maybe complex, but it's relatively simple, right? Because it's about a matter, it's not about a person. So they range from that all the way to us being involved. You see this here, and it's a very different graphic, right? Because there's many more ups and downs, and it starts on the left side here, as you can see, going from anxiety to happiness to, I wouldn't think there's a permanent state of depression in that valley. I think temporarily being a little bit demotivated, that's only normal. But importantly, if you look at the trajectory and you look at the guy or the character on the far right, it's about moving forward, and we can all do this. And that is what today's advice is all about: acknowledging what you have to go through, giving you some advice to move forward. Now, more specifically and more formally, so to understand for all of us what are transitions, what are the related opportunities, but also the challenges that you need to anticipate and you need to address. How do you address those challenges and opportunities? So what are some of the strategies to manage those transition strategies, but also tactics in terms of what you can actually do that is within your control? And then the translation into moving it, as one of my colleagues always used to say, off the walls into the hall. So making it meaningful for you in terms of what are your actions now to actually take the learnings from today, the insights from today, and shape your own plan. Because ultimately, none of this matters unless you embrace it and you step into it. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you will see the results. That is one of my key learnings. The key challenge is actually that first step, because you're afraid of it. But once you walk through and you look back, however that long that may take, you realize the one thing is, I should have done this a little bit earlier. So just keep that in mind. So those are the desired outcomes. Now, what all transitions have in common are these three phases. It starts in the bottom left corner with the endings, then followed by the neutral zone and the new beginnings. We will walk through all three and look at what they mean, what the goals are, so what you should try to focus on, and then provide you with some of the, some advice, some tools to consider to basically manage that phase before you move into the next one. And you need to close one before you move on to the next. It's similar to, I'm not a big believer in multitasking. So when my kids struggle, I was like, look, it's very simple. Finish one task before you start the other or the next one. That also applies here. So we'll go through this in detail and you will see this graphic, but this applies to any transition. You leave something behind, the ending, so you leave it behind, you get the closure. You're in the neutral zone where you're no longer attached to the old, but you haven't quite figured out yet what the new looks like or what it is. So you can't really hold on to the new. The neutral zone is the danger zone. And then the new beginnings, where you step into something new, and people often forget to continue to do what actually got them to the new beginnings, and then they fall back, okay? So those are the three that you will see throughout the next 45 minutes. Now, three zones, I mentioned there's opportunities, there's also challenges. And based on my own experience and based on the clients that I've worked with, there's usually four that are fairly common. And you'll see them on the next slide here. So let's start with the top left here. Traps that are holding people back, right? Or are moving people backwards instead of moving forward. So instead of into the neutral, into the new, you're in the neutral, but you fall back. Why is that? Chances are it's one of the four reasons here. First one, lack of direction. So what you often hear from people is like, I don't know what I want to do, and that's okay, but I'll figure it out as I go along. Right. So the idea being, I'll do a few interviews. If it's about a job, for instance, I'll talk to a few people, and then I'll basically shape my path forward. That is not a good way of doing it. Why? Well, if you don't know, not exactly, not to a detail, but if you don't have a sense of direction and you interact with people and you interact with potential, for instance, employment opportunities, new folks, what they're going to hear is this person does not know what they want. So while he or she is interviewing for one role, I'm not sure they really want this. So it creates questions, doubts, and it is basically a no from an employer perspective, for instance. And then you start to wonder why this didn't work out, right? It's clearly because you don't have a sense of direction yet. So don't go out yet. So lack of direction is one trap. Thinking you can just wing it moving forward. Moving over to the right, a limiting belief that often happens in that neutral zone, the danger zone, and that is something that you think, a thought that you think is the absolute truth and stops you from doing things. What does this mean? I had this quite a number of years back when somebody being me, when somebody challenged me on running a marathon. I was like, look, I'm 6'4", I'm 200 pounds. My profile doesn't finish marathons. That was my truth. That was what I believed in. And it was a friend of mine who then took me out, and we went to in Frankfurt, Germany, area where I grew up. And he took me to the finish line and he showed me the people that crossed the finish line. And guess what? They were 6'6", 300 pounds. They all finished. The point being that what you have in your head, that limiting belief, is your truth. It is not necessarily the truth based on facts. So be aware of limiting beliefs. Bottom left, the past predicting the future, right? So what you see again in particular in the professional world during interviews, people going into an interview saying, I have all this experience, right? So let's just say you were an accountant at Amazon and you have a new job as perhaps a strategic or financial planner at, I don't know, American Express. When you go in there and you say, this is what I did at this is what I did at Amazon. I did this well at Amazon. So you tie it back to Amazon because you were successful at Amazon. That doesn't go over well because guess what? Amex doesn't care what you did at Amazon. They want to know how your experience at Amazon is transferable and how it helps them. So you got to be careful in terms of not just leveraging experience and thinking that will get you to the next place. You got to make an informed decision in terms of which of my experiences will help in the new opportunity and how are they transferable. So be very selective because, as they say, what got you here does not necessarily get you there. There's a truth to that. And here's the practical advice to it. And then it's the voice in the head. Basically, we all have that, right? When this, whatever you want to call it, I call it the voice in the head, is basically telling you no. So you can't do this. You're not good enough. Who are you to think that you can, get that new job at American Express? That is very, very normal because that is how we're all wired. I spent 10 years in neurology, and this was often a discussion. Unfortunately, as smart as our brain and as complex as it is not, it has not been very evolving over the last probably 5,000 years because we're wired for safety and for comfort. And that goes back to the old days when, you want to stay in that cave. If you go outside, well, guess what? There might be a polar bear and you're not coming back inside because he's having you for lunch. As funny as that may sound, that's the reason why we're wired the way they are, and why we have a tendency to avoid pain, to avoid spending energy. That is the history of that. Can it be changed? It can, and we'll talk about that. But those are the four: a lack of direction, a limiting belief, the past predicting the future, you believing in that and leveraging that, and the voice in your head. Those are the four that are common. Those are also the four that you can actively manage yourself with a little bit of help to basically avoid them and manage them as you move forward. Okay. So to make this all, again, as we said in the beginning, specific and tangible, what Michelle and I were thinking about is to say, look, we'll go through the phases, but it's probably more meaningful if we base this on a couple of different scenarios, right? To be a little bit more practical in terms of what does that mean? in a specific situation. We cannot address every situation, but we figured let's just define the bookends so that everything else, chances are, is somewhere in between those two extremes. So with that, the first scenario that we're going to walk you through is what we call an expected transition. So this is something where you stay within the same company, and as part of your development plan, the company said, hey, you're going to move on from one department to the other. In this particular case, basically from sales into marketing. Closely related one things, yeah, they're all commercial. How is it different? It is very different. And that transition, as positive as it might be, it needs to be managed. So that's perhaps the more simplified version of it, right? The other extreme is the unexpected transition. So this is basically a scenario when the company sits you down and all of a sudden says, you know what, it was all good, but we need to cut headcount, we need to reduce numbers, and therefore, unfortunately, you're also one of the ones that has to go. That happened to me, for instance. It is not very pleasant, and as much as they tell you that it's not about your capabilities, your performance, it's a kick in the teeth, right, from which you need to recover. So the scenario here is an employee basically is exited from the company after 5 years. So significant amount of time within his company or her company. It's also the first job that they had. So quite an impact, right? It's unexpected. They didn't see it coming. There was no announcement. And that puts them also not only out of a job, but also they're now facing their first transition, right? The first one out from college into a job, that was somewhere in between the bookends. But this is a major one, right? Because you didn't see it coming, you couldn't prepare, and here you are needing to figure out what comes next. So those are the scenarios we'll refer back to as we go through the 3 phases. Let's pause here because that was a lot of information to begin with. There will be more information coming. What questions do you have so far? It's probably easiest if you just pop open a microphone and just speak up if there are questions.
Actually, I'm interested too to know, and you can also use the chat if there are certain types of transitions that you're thinking about as you're listening to this too.
Yep. Thank you, Michelle.
I have a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Transitioning, if we're gonna transition from like working in corporate America to being an entrepreneur, right? Like, I guess my question is, and this is one that I normally fight with and that I'm actually currently fighting with, is do I leave my current role, right, and just jump straight into entrepreneurship? Because when you read all those books and you listen to all those podcasts, it's so much time and energy. Or do you gradually go at it because you are a parent and you need to make sure you still have income?
Yeah. It's exactly, it's a very, very good question, right? You hear these success stories and, oh, look, they dropped out of college, moved into the garage, and, within 24 hours, they made 7 figures. Right? That's just not the reality of it, right? So I think in your case, or in any case, it is really specific, right? In terms of you needing to decide, okay, what is it? I have the goal, right? I want to be independent and be my own master, so to say, financially and in terms of what I do. That's fine. But then the question is, okay, if that's your end goal, where are you starting and what does that transition look like based on what factors, right? And factors can be, for instance, when I got into coaching after corporate, I didn't know how to coach. I was being coached, which is very different from actually doing the coaching, right? So I realized that over time that I got to go back to school for some time and get the credentials, get the experience. That's one thing. So there's a checklist. For me, it was, what does it take to be good in whatever I want to be? What is also the financial trajectory that you have that decides, and can you basically go to school full time? Do you have to do something else? what is your social structure, to your point, right? Do you spend time with your kids, with your parents? What is it? So I think there's a multitude of answers based on the situation where you start. You know what the end point looks like, but every starting point is different. And therefore, you may want to continue to work a little bit longer and on the side do certain things, put them in place so that you can chop this up into phases, right? So that's a broad answer to your question. If you want to, you can ping me afterwards and we can have a follow-on discussion. I don't want to spend too much time in case there's other questions, but hopefully that gives you an initial sense. And again, if there's interest, happy to chat a little bit more about it.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question from Kevin. Any
Okay.
advice for someone who has found a field they are competent in, but every few years there seems to be an unexpected transition?
Okay, Kevin, tell me a little bit more, because that can mean a number of different things. I don't know if you want to speak up. Just pop open the microphone or pop on the microphone.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I've just, in my particular case, I found a field that I think I'm pretty, like I said, competent in. But every couple of years, I find myself looking for a new company, whether it be, for a variety of reasons. And you talked about unexpected transitions and having a plan. And if every few years it's something unexpected happens, then how, any advice for someone formulating a plan when in their past life, past professional life, an unexpected transition happens pretty frequently.
Yeah, I guess there's two potential just broad areas, right? I'll refer a little bit back to my experience. I was surprised, for instance, in certain roles that I just get bored after 3 years, right? So that is because of my personality, not a bad personality, but through some of the things we'll talk about later, through some of the assessments that I did, what I found out is like, look, you're just the kind of person to set things up and get them from 0 to 60. You're not going to be anyone from 61 to 100. That's not your thing. So therefore, you need to change companies after, whatever it takes, 2 years, 4 years, 3 years. So I found my focus after a little bit based on what were just strange situations where I got bored and my performance went down. But it was driven by me, right? That's one thing. The other thing, then, if you happen to, you know what you love and it happens to be unexpected because the company shut down, company got acquired, something else happens, but it's beyond your control, and it was a decision or it was triggered by the company. I would think then, in terms of looking at there need to be, when you look at the different companies, maybe the last 3 or so, they probably all had something in common, right? And that is something you want to avoid in the future. Again, we can take it offline a little bit, but often in my past world, when you work in biotechs and you start with them early because you want to go from 0 to 60, and that's great. And then you realize, oh, we just got bought out by Pfizer, by Novartis, by whatnot. So it's inherent in that segment of the market that these smaller companies, they will get bought out. So if you want a more steady, more predictable, tenure within a company, that is something you need to look at. Is that maybe it's a company that can, has enough financial resources to basically feed itself. So what does that profile look like? So I think there's a little bit of analysis involved in terms of, is it you or is it the company? And within the companies, what do they have in common that you want to avoid in the future? Again, broad answer to address this. Happy to follow up with you, Kevin, and go into a little bit more detail, but good question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let's move on in the interest of time, because I think we do want to move forward, but it's great to have these questions because it shows there's interest here. Okay, here we go. That's on me. So first phase, endings, right? You see the graphic, obviously. So we'll talk about, what does it mean? What should you focus on? What should your goal be? What strategies, tools will you leave? And then just some comments in terms of potential differences between you move within the company, it's a development opportunity. What is relevant in that context versus unexpected, what is important in that scenario. And the slides are laid out for the unexpected transition, right? Because that's a little bit more complex. But for the endings, it's basically the meaning is you got to say goodbye to people, goodbye to the environment. So the things that you've been exposed to, what people often forget, what you also say goodbye to is a set of specific habits and a structure that you had. Well, it's sad and it's common sense. People know that, yeah, I'm no longer going to this building, taking, the red line to that building, and I'm going to miss, Joe and Sue, whoever the colleagues are. That's all expected. What is often unexpected by people is that, the next day, the next week, the next month, nobody and nothing pushes you to get up in the morning and whatever it is that you do in the morning, work out or basically get ready for the day. That pressure, or you can say that habit, that structure is no longer there, which is not helpful for most people. So one thing to keep in mind when this happens in part of the endings is to think of what is the structure. Yes, sorry, first step, what's the social environment you need? Who do you need to keep in touch with from the previous company? Absolutely, all of that. But then also, what is it that gets you up in the morning? What is it that makes you happy during the day? Do you work out in the morning, read the paper? What's your routine? It took me a good 3 months to figure that out. But once I had figured it out, to me, it's an hour. It's 20 minutes of mind space, a little bit of meditation, 20 minutes of reading a book, and 20 minutes of reading the paper. And before that, I work out a little bit. Then I'm set. If I don't do that, it's not going to be a good day. So keep that in mind. Often overlook habits and structure that you need to put in place when you enter into these, into the ending zone. That is often overlooked. The goal for you ultimately here is to get closure, right? Closure means you no longer blame, Amazon because they fired you, for instance. You no longer say, I wish I could have stayed in sales in the other scenario. Why did they send me to marketing? That takes a little while, but it's important. Why is it important? If you always think back to what was before, it gets frustrating because you can't change that. It's in the past. There's nothing to be gained by looking back. And it also, guess what? You're not focusing on the future. So chances are you're overlooking a lot of opportunities because you're focused on the past and you don't spend enough time, enough focus, and you don't listen enough to forward-looking opportunities. So that's why closure is really, really important. And you see that a lot in the most common context, which is when unfortunately somebody passes away, right? Like a family member, whatever. You always hear this emphasis on it's important to get closure because only then can people again start to interact and move forward. And it's the same here. So that's why closure is really important. What can you use? What can you do to get closure? Throughout the process, a trusted partner helps a ton. That can be a family member. It can be a close friend. It needs to be someone that you trust. The trust goes both ways, right? And it needs to be someone who is not telling you what you want to hear. It needs to be someone who tells you what you need to hear. That is important because you're going to go into a little bit of you armoring up and, coming a little bit, I'm going to sleep in a little bit. So you need someone to wake you up and to keep you on track. You really need a guide and a partner that you can talk to, but also one that you can listen to. That is really important. I had two of those, two of my best friends, eye-opening. I'm forever grateful for them. That is one. We talked about the structure and the routine, right? What gets you out of bed in the morning so that you come into a rhythm, things become easier for you, and you can focus on other things because you're not in bed, you're not, playing, or you're not on Netflix, whatever it is. It's interesting how people get completely distracted for long periods of time, days, weeks. So what have you done the last 2 weeks? I watched Prison Break again. What? Really interesting. So be aware of it because awareness is the first step that needs to change through the help of a trusted partner, structure, and a routine. Other people also need a focus in terms of something specific. They need a challenge. They wake up not necessarily to a structure or routine, but they wake up to a challenge and build the structure and the routine around the challenge, right? In my case, I decided very early on, because one of my trusted partner tells me, is like, look, you need to train for a 50K run. And I was like, why would I do this? 2 weeks later, I put the plan together. It helped me because it provided me with a structure, a goal, and also success, right? It's like, all right, today I started, I did well in the 10K, 15K, and so forth. And then some of us might be ready towards the end of the endings to think about, at Amazon, what did I learn and what is transferable? So I'm saying this with a little bit of caution, because most people do that in the neutral zone when they've let go and they have a little bit of a distance to look back and say, okay, so what was it that I liked at Amazon? How is that transferable? For instance, not to say, oh, accounting at Amazon was really great. Like, no, that goes from that to, I like accounting. I like accounting because I like the detailed aspects of it, and I like the financial planning behind it. That's a transferable skill. So that's how you got to think about this. Differences between expected and unexpected here. I would think that the closure is important. So when the example from sales to marketing, it is important to not completely always go back to sales. Well, when I was in sales, now you're in a new department. Marketing works with sales, but marketing is marketing. What they want to hear is, look, I really like this. Perhaps we should think about how sales looks at this. So be careful in terms of how you position yourself, because you're a member of a new team. So how do you position that experience? What are the transferable skills, insights, and advice that you have for those for the marketing guys? Trusted partners. If you have a short career move, 4 weeks, well planned, a mentor is helpful, right? To remind you of certain things in terms of going in, being curious, for instance, asking questions instead of like delivering answers right away from a sales perspective. I don't think you need a challenge, structure, routine. 4 weeks are easy to manage. Usually it's 4 weeks or less. Transferable skills are important. So that's the piece. I'm looking at the time. We're doing well, 12:34. That's the endings. We'll have time later on to talk about specific questions, but we also have now time for 1 or 2 questions specific to the ending. So if there's a question, please speak up and we'll take a couple of minutes to address it. Okay, I think that means that we're good. Again, later on we'll have time. So endings, get closure, move on to the neutral zone. Neutral zone, also called the danger zone. And it's a phase where you finally found closure. You're no longer thinking about Amazon, you're good, and that's great. But the reality is also you haven't found your new opportunity, new beginnings. You haven't defined it, maybe you thought about it a little bit, but there's no place to go to Monday morning, 9 o'clock, right? So you are a little bit, not just a little bit, a lot in, outside of your comfort zone because you have nothing tangible, nothing to show. So it's completely normal to feel lost here, at times a little bit frustrated. That is okay. What you need to think about is that you managed to pass the first phase, and that is to get closure. So you are exactly where you need to be, and discomfort is normal. This is the time, looking at the goal, to find your focus by assessing some of the options that you started to consider, perhaps at the end of the beginnings, at the end of the endings, and to re-engage. So instead of thinking, I can go as a financial planner I can go to American Express. I can go to Fidelity. I can do my own practice. So all these opportunities that you think of, this is the time when to lock into that direction. Okay, it is, for instance, financial planning. What's the business model? So you narrow it down to, do I want to work for a company? Maybe the answer is yes. Okay, good, at least initially. What size of company? Is it a smaller outfit, privately held, 20 people, 10 people? Is it Amex, whatever it is, 200,000 people? What is it? If it's Amex, 200,000 people, okay, who else is there? Well, there's Amex, there's Fidelity. So you bring it down from 100 opportunities to maybe 10. 10 that are meaningful, that basically meet your checklist, and then you go deep in terms of what's the cultural academics, what is the how does fidelity line up to what I think is important to me in terms of the culture of the company, the pay of the company, the roles that they have, the development, for instance, that company offers. So you focus in to then engage, right? And engage means having discussions with people that have maybe worked at Amex or that are working at Amex. You leverage the alumni network. You'd be surprised how many people know someone who works somewhere or has worked there or knows someone else. You start the networking, right? Before you re-engage. So you have a good sense to say, yep, out of the 10, I think these are the top 3 that I want to focus on based on these discussions. You may even get a referral out of it. But that is the purpose here, is sort of assessing the options, having discussions to then re-engage. The tools that you can use, again, a trusted partner is helpful, that tells you, look, you need to come to a conclusion here. You've now been in the zone for 6 weeks. It tells you what you need to hear. Some people, as they're lost, and again, very uncomfortable in this zone and haven't quite gotten to fully defining the new beginnings. I had this, right? When I was sitting there like, oh God, I want to really go back into commercial. God, I haven't really gotten any bites in weeks for commercial. Who am I? Then I realized, well, I haven't done anything in commercial. So why would people know that you're no longer, in a way, employed? What really helps then is to get a quick sense of, your competency, the value you provide, but also to explore certain options is to volunteer. You can volunteer at a university. You can volunteer at a for instance, a board of directors for a nonprofit organization. You can volunteer in a soup kitchen, in a Lions Club. All those things are opportunity for you to get back some of the value that you think you've lost, but you really haven't. You just need to be reminded. And also good opportunities to figure out maybe that's something you want to explore further. Volunteering is underestimated. It's of great value in the neutral zone. Again, I mentioned this before, this is also once you have your focus in terms of where you want to go, you want to broaden your communication in terms of, hey, I'm looking for financial institutions with this profile where they're looking for financial planners. I'm looking at Amex, Fidelity, who else? Oh, there's company ABC. Oh, never thought of. Do you know anyone there? And you start that broader communication, eventually leading to networking. That is the neutral zone where you go from, I'm free to choose. I'm no longer connected. My filters are cleared now. I can focus to figure out what's my sense of direction. What are the companies? How do I engage with those companies? Okay. Difference between expected and unexpected. I don't think you need to volunteer in the, what we talked about is the unexpected, right? You go through the details. If it's expected, I don't think you need to volunteer. Broader communication and networking helps in terms of you making a career move so that your network, the people you've interacted with, LinkedIn and whatnot, so that they know that you're on the move. Because guess what? Not every move is successful. So you may go into new beginnings, but then go back into the neutral zone. And that's okay too. But what you've done in the meantime is you build a network in terms of, your sense of direction, they know it. So it's easier to re-engage should you have to go back into the neutral zone. Okay. Any questions on the neutral zone before we go into the final zone, the new beginnings? And then we have a little bit more extensive Q&A. You're good? Okay. How is the pace? Too fast? Okay. Silence is agreement. All right. I think we're doing okay then. Go ahead. Say again.
I was going to say it's a good pace.
Okay, good. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, so now you're in the new beginnings, right? So this is exciting. You're finally making progress, right? If you're in the extended or the unexpected transition, this could be after weeks or perhaps even 2 or 3 months. You're finally moving forward. You've developed the courage because you have a goal, you have clear expectations, you know what to say and who to approach. This is fantastic, right? So there's a lot of excitement and you've built momentum because of the work that you did together with your trusted partner. So the goal really here is to reach your near-term goals. And what I mean by that is don't go all out, right? Because you came out of neutral zone, chances are you're going to explore a new company, a new industry, a new function. Set yourself smaller goals. You know, in many of the professional plans, it's this old, what are you going to do the first week, first 30 days, and first whatever, 60 days? Those are helpful because they chop things up and you can focus on smaller steps. And you also, which will help you, is it's easier to get wins under your belt, right? So an accomplishment will further increase your self-confidence. And that's what you need at that point, particularly in that unexpected transition. You want confidence builders. And the big goals, sure, if you meet them, they're great confidence builders, but there's also risk associated with them. Why don't you start with smaller goals, step by step, getting you closer and closer, and you can course correct based on the feedback. It's the better way, I think, of moving into the new beginnings. Plans for what is the end of the first week, first months, first 3 months, what does that look like? With the trusted partner, again, that should be your trusted partner ultimately should be with you no matter what, because it's always good to have someone to check in with, I personally think. But the tools then is to prioritize your targets, right? And deepen your approach. So first, I'm going to talk to Amex. Why? Well, that's why I have the most contacts. I like what I've heard about the internal culture. Let me find out a little bit more in terms of what is the pay structure for an accountant at American Express. And you go to Glassdoor, there's all kinds of resources to understand that. And again, you go deeper with more knowledge basically to then approach, right? If that is needed. Again, depending on if you did the work already towards the end of neutral zone, you might be ready. Chances are you're going to go a little bit deeper in the beginning of the new beginnings, no pun intended. One of the traps here is also that you're so excited, you forgot what got you here, right? So all of a sudden, when you practice your pitch, your conversation, when they ask you, so tell me about yourself, you go back into, I was a great accountant at Amazon. And remember, what we said was they don't care about Amazon. What they care about is the skills that you acquired there and how they help American Express. They don't care about Amazon. So be mindful of the learnings in phase 1 and in phase 2. And that's where your trusted partner is helpful, right? Who's like, look, remember what we said, don't talk about Amazon. You need to think Amex now, how you help them. Really helpful reminders because you don't want to, struggle just because you didn't pay attention to all the work that you've done previously. And then it's also prepare for setbacks in terms of, sorry, that's my dog. Hold on just 1 second. Speaking of setbacks, okay, I think we made peace. Sorry about that, but that's reality, right? Not everything is going to work out, right? New beginnings. That's why you have not just one target, Amex, you have a round of targets and you start with one. And if that fails, that's just the way it is. You can't change it. The key is, what did you learn from that? What kind of feedback did you get? And how does it apply to perhaps Fidelity or the next company, right? So setbacks are okay. They're learnings. And it was just a mismatch, right, in that setting. And that's just the way it is. So you have to be ready for that. It's normal. It happens. And that's just the way it is. You've done the work. You know what closure is. You know what phase 2 is. And that's okay. Differences here between the unexpected and the expected transition. I think for the shorter version, prioritize your targets, deepen your approach. It's not that formal. But trying to figure out who are your stakeholders, who do you want to get feedback from, right? In terms, because you're new. Say simple discussions such as, hey, I'm taking on this role as financial planner. Person who was there previously to work at what worked, what didn't work, what needs continued focus, what advice do you have for me? Those are easy ways for you to trigger a conversation and you get feedback. You also build trust to people if you act on that feedback. So it's a light touch on that. And also to remember not to talk about whether it's sales in the one department or whether the other example is talking about Amazon all the time. So that's the third phase when you're in new beginnings. And then the cycle repeats itself. Hopefully you spend a long time in new beginnings, but in my case, after 3 years, I usually switch things up. and I go through this again. It's a normal cycle. It's a good cycle. It's a cycle that gets you ready for the next opportunity. Now, all of this is important, and they're good learnings, but ultimately this is the most important one, right? The neutral zone is, logically speaking, you can either go forward, and that takes a lot of focus, work, and awareness in terms of what the traps are that we talked about, or you can drop back. You can roll back into endings, which is not a pleasant place because you spend the time, and now you're here again talking about Amazon. So that's why a plan and a guide, that trusted partner, are really helpful to hold you accountable. Okay, so we have another 15 minutes roughly. What I want to quickly walk you through is how to manage the traps. We'll skip this for now. This is important. So you see on the left-hand side here, in what on the original slide was red, it's a little bit less reddish now. That's okay. It's a lack of direction, past, predicting the future, limiting beliefs, and voice in the head. What can you do to overcome this? Let's start with the first one, lack of direction. A lack of direction is you don't know what your preferences are. I could go here, I could go there. You're basically in a holding pattern. What helps you tremendously, available online, available in the Career Center at Northeastern, do self-assessments. There's two types. There's attitudinal tests. Basically, they tell you how you look at certain situations and what your blind spots are. And then there's also personality assessments that tell you what your preferences are. For instance, do you make decisions based on intuition and gut feeling, or in data, or somewhere in between? Those things are important to employers because they will listen to that and often judge you or assess you on, is the personality a fit, and is the the attitude, so like how you look at things, is that a fit with your organization? The more you know about it, the better you can answer those questions. But more importantly, when you do particular self-assessment, Myers-Briggs, you may have heard of, again, ping us after. When you do this assessment, not only will you get a printout and an analysis and a conclusion, it will also tell you the preferred industries where your personality type is doing quite well. It will tell you what functions, it will tell you what size of company. So it's a really good start to get a sense of direction for potential pathways, self-assessments. Everybody's heart rate usually goes up when they hear assessments, including mine. The benefit is almost priceless of those things. So that's one. We talked about volunteering, exposing yourself to different opportunities. The New England, the Northeastern Career Studio, you have a variety of volunteers. There are some who have a lot of experience that can also help. I'm there every Thursday afternoon. And then there's your own network, right? Reaching out and having discussions to get a sense of direction, to ask for feedback on certain questions that you have. That's one. Past predicting the future, again, self-assessments, because you will become aware of your blind spots. By definition, you're not aware of them when you go in, but then you often hear, it's like, oh, you automatically do this. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. That's the reason why you keep going back to Amazon. That's the reason why you keep referring back to sales. So now that you know that, keep that in mind, use this tool to move forward. That's the benefit of the self-assessment, which then will help you with defining what are in fact the transferable skills that you have. Self-assessments are help me tremendously, and I do them with all my clients, and most of them are afraid. And afterwards, they, oh, that was probably the best part, the self-assessment and the debrief afterwards. Limiting beliefs. There's a great book that I highly recommend, Growth Mindset, and it's called Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, I believe, D-W-E-C-K. And she talks about the benefits of curiosity, having an open mindset, and moving forward, and the benefits of that. She also talks about the focus on, not what your truth is, your belief, but what the reality is. That's where your trusted partner comes in, that tells you what you need to hear. And then, excuse me, scientifically speaking, the brain responds to that. The brain, you will reframe your reference, and the brain will rewire automatically. So this will become second nature to you. Plenty of scientific evidence out there. The voice in the head, we covered this. It's being aware of it, that it's normal when somebody says, don't do that because you're going to look like a fool if this doesn't work out. Being aware of it, the fact that it's normal, acknowledging it, knowing it's a protective mechanism, that's just the way we're wired, and then managing it in terms of, for instance, recalling. Well, the last 10 times I've done this, I've been successful 9 times. There's really no reason why this shouldn't work out. Those are the conversations, the thinking that will help you to manage the voice in your head, not get in the way, and rewire. So this happens less and less often. Those are the 4 things that are the major traps. And here are the solutions. Top line. If you look this up, particularly self-assessments, Myers-Briggs, extremely helpful. Okay. But ultimately what it comes down to, I can't overemphasize this, is you. You need to hold yourself accountable to get into, to take the action and to explore where you are, what you should be doing, what you have done, and what the future looks like. You need to hold yourself accountable. Sometimes that helps having a partner. It helped me tremendously because I know myself. And it is extremely helpful to hear from another voice, not the one in your head, that tells you what you need to hear. And that's what's often referred to your agency, right? Your own ability to act as your own agent for yourself. So to step outside eventually and you observe yourself like, look at what I'm doing. I'm a fool for doing this. There's no reason for me to run a marathon or to train for a marathon because I've seen the folks crossing the finish line. They're 6'5", some of them are 250 pounds and more. Weight is not an issue. It's the training, right? To ultimately leading the choices and coming out of, whatever your challenge was before and making a new start. It's possible, but it starts with you and your agency. So what we want to do now is to hold you accountable, right? As we said before, the recommendation is for you to follow the following steps. 1, describe your transition, right? In terms of what's the situation that you're in, whatever the format is. Look, they cut me, I'm making this up. Twitter cut me 4 weeks ago. I'm not sure what I want to do, this, that, and the other. Which phase are you in? I think I'm in phase 1, right? I haven't really found closure. Okay. Now, that is just an assessment of the current state. Now you go to planning. Step 3, consider the content of the slides here, all 3 phases, the tools, and come up with an action plan, and not an action plan, what you will eventually do down the road. That is when you lose accountability. It is something that addresses what are you going to do this weekend in this context? What will you do next week? And what will you have accomplished by the end of March? There's no such thing as a perfect plan, but there is a first step to trigger your brain and put some thoughts down in terms of what you could do. And then that brings to step 4, to commit to someone else to talk about this plan, get their input, and make it a stronger plan that helps you move forward. So our suggestion is that come to the Career Studio, have someone to talk to. You can also, again, ping me, for instance, and I'll give you some advice in terms of the plan, or the trusted friend that we've been referring to, and set yourself a time limit. This one, as you can see, Wednesday, March 15th. It's only 7 days, 6 days. That's all it takes to get started. It gives you 6 days. I'm not good with the math, as you can tell. It gives you a short amount of time, but enough time to get started. Take the slides, take a look, jot down some notes, and have a discussion in terms of here's what I think I should do, because it gets you into action. It creates data because you create proximity. You're close to someone. You'll make mistakes, you get feedback, and your plan will get better and better. And you'll get the sense of self-confidence back if you're losing it, because you're making progress, right? You're reaching out to people, really important. So those are the 4 steps that we suggest you do next. We have a couple more minutes now, and one of the questions, or if not the question, is what is your first action after this class?
Read the slides.
Good, that's a good start. Yeah. We'll make those slides available. Michelle knows how to do it. What else?
Write down what you got. You got to put it on paper.
writing things down is helpful. And it's, believe it or not, it's better than typing things up, because more nerves are used when you handwrite. And write, not only does it challenge you to articulate exactly what it is that you want to do, the situation that you're in and so forth, but there's a higher probability of leading it to action in terms of just being in this planning loop or a holding pattern where I think this is not perfect, I got to give it one more go. No, talk to a trusted friend. That to me will be my advice, to say the first action is, who can I talk to about this? Because then you have someone else, you talk to him and she's going to say, well, we're going to meet Wednesday next week. I want to have something in writing. Anyone else in terms of what your first step is, or your first action step?
Get into a routine. Like you mentioned, I think the ending page, you come up the initial shock, if you will, from the transit from the old to the new, and you'd have to get into a better routine.
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's 1, 2, and 3. Start somewhere. It's the first step that makes the difference, right? That gets you going, that creates motion and also positive emotions, and that will get you going. Say, okay, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, I'm gonna sit down with a piece of paper and I will start. And whatever it takes to get there is what you should do. There's a great book, by the way, it's called Atomic Habits, which we can also recommend in terms of increasing the probability of you doing something by removing barriers. But it is up to you. It's the first step. People who follow this succeed, have a higher chance of succeeding. And if they stumble in the end because an employer, there's a mismatch, that's okay. They know what to do. So they're in much better shape. Even if the first contact is a rejection, that's okay, because they've gone through this and they know what to do now moving forward. So I think in the interest of time, what we will show is, you'll see the slides, but here's our information, our details in terms of feedback, in terms of, was this helpful? What other information you may need if we did this again? And also advice that we can give, right? You see here, it's in the chat too, in terms of if you're within the 7-year window of graduation, come to the studio. You can also contact me after year 8. Michelle is your contact, but we're close. So we'll help out one way or the other. The importance is you need to ask for help, right? And that's why we're here. That's why we're here ultimately. Any final questions before we wrap this up? Maybe I'll hand it back over to Michelle with 1 minute left, Michelle.
Okay, well, Jörg, thank you so much for sharing this model. I think it's a very powerful model for any type of transition. It just gives you a roadmap. And I appreciate too that you added the potential traps and what to do with them, and just some different angles for considering this. And one of the things I like to emphasize too is that, with the unexpected transitions, when I've worked with people going through that, it's unexpected, and that's the rough part. But many people have found really good things come of it, even though the process may not be what you had hoped it would be, or it might be rough. But so to really focus on the opportunities available in these transitions, and to find that positive mindset.
And it to me, the big thing is, and I can't say it often enough, like, have a trusted partner, because if you by yourself, it's chances are it's a negative spiral in the wrong direction. If you have a partner, someone to talk to, that will be of tremendous help.
Yeah, and knowing, if you're stuck, that's a good sign to get some sort of help, whether it's a coach, career coach, counselor, friend, any of that. It can just make the process faster and easier. So thank you all for joining us. Let us know if we can be of help, and we hope to see you at some upcoming programs.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time, and don't be shy, reach out. That's why we're here, okay?